This is Chapter 13 for Applied Research Methods, Statistics, Evaluation, Research, and Problem Analysis. This is a pretty short chapter. Probably won't go over everything in it. I'm just going to point out those ideas that are most important. This is the type of research that you would do really more at a more advanced level, as well as you might get a employment with the state and have a job where you are evaluating programs that are funded by the state, and this is the type of procedure that you would use to evaluate those, or to evaluate any program that you wanted to do research on. So let's begin. Evaluation research. First definition refers to research. It's a purpose rather than a specific method. It seeks to evaluate the impact of interventions if some result was produced. In other words, you might be evaluating a treatment program to determine if the outcomes are matching the goals. Problem analysis. It's designed to help public officials choose from alternative future actions. So you use this method to evaluate and decide whether or not what they want to work is actually working. It might be done for policy intervention, an action taken for the purpose of producing some intended result. Is the policy working? Evidence-based policy. The actions of justice agencies are linked to evidence used for planning. Evidence-based research and evidence-based decisions is what justice agencies use to make all of their decisions in regarding policy, clinical treatment, outcomes across the board. The process to evaluate policies begins with supporting a new course of action or opposition to existing policy. Policy makers may consider ultimate goals and actions to achieve those goals. The outputs are the means to achieve the desired goals of that program or policy. The impacts refers to the basic question about what a policy seeks to achieve. If some policy is taken, then we expect some type of result, and that's what is being evaluated. During this process, we want to link this process of evaluating the agency to the actual evaluation. In other words, are policies being implemented as planned? And really what you're looking at is not if they're meeting certain standards, but are they meeting their own standards? The policies they implemented, the goals that they implemented, are they achieving these goals? And are they documenting how they're achieving these goals? Evaluation seeks to link intended actions and goals of policy to empirical evidence that they are being carried out as planned and that policies have the effects, that they're getting the input and the output that they are wanting. So before you would evaluate any program or any policy, the first thing you need to do is to learn the policy goals. Understand exactly what the treatment, the program is trying to accomplish. You need to understand what you're evaluating before you evaluate it. You want to do a pre-evaluation to determine whether conditions are present. You want support from relevant organizations as needed. You need to know what the goals and objectives are, and how the program translate those. And what kind of records and data and research is available from the program, and who has a direct or indirect stake in the program. You identify your stakeholders as well as your focus people and your point of contacts. This is prior to ever evaluating. You want to, as I was saying, there are different stakeholders and they have different goals and views as how the program should operate. So you want to hear all the different views. You have to have outcomes that are clearly specified. You want to create objectives of what you are going to look at yourself, and you need to be able to define and measure and decide between using current measures or creating new ones to measure how the program is succeeding. There are different designs for this type of program evaluation, just as there's different designs in qualitative interviewing, different designs in quantitative statistics, different designs of all the sampling that we've talked about. So the first one is randomized evaluation designs. You remember when we randomize anything, we are doing it to avoid selection bias, and it allows that assumption that groups are created by random assignment are statistically equivalent. Case flow is another design, represents a process through which subjects are accumulated into experimental and control groups. And treatment integrity, whether an experimental intervention is delivered as is intended. Is it reliable? So are they doing what they say they're doing or what they mean to do? Now, before I move on, I want to make sure that this is understood. What we're talking about on these designs for program evaluation, if we wanted to evaluate a program, we want to do it in the same way that we would do our own research. So if we are evaluating, for instance, you go to a program and you want to look at drug abuse, and you want to see how the participants in a certain program are doing, you want to randomly select those files and those participants within that program, so that you don't have any bias in the ones that you chose. Is the same as what happens many times. The evaluator will choose those clients or that data that they want to review, and they will not ask the stakeholders, can you just give us 10 of your clients to interview. That's really not the way it works, because then it's going to be biased. They're obviously going to give you the evaluator the ones that are succeeding. And what this staff must accept those random assignment, and they have to agree. When an evaluator comes in, they have to agree to abide by what the evaluator wants, and they might use experimental interventions that are applied to treatment groups and withheld. So you might be doing this. You want to test how well a program is doing, so you might choose a group for your experimental group, and then you have a group that you're going to control and compare it to. And this is all done within that treatment setting or within a correctional program. This is talking about, there was a couple researchers. Let's see, and I just forgot their names real quick here. Let's see. See, I don't remember everything, so sometimes I have to look to my notes. Balmer and Mendelsohn, they conducted 2 random experiments. They wanted to evaluate programs that combined home detention and electronic monitoring, otherwise called ELMO. And this program paid less attention to delivering program elements and using ELMO information than adults, and it was difficult to maintain a desired level of control over the experimental conditions. It was also difficult when more than one organization is involved whenever you are doing this evaluation. So randomization does not control for the variation in treatment integrity and program delivery. You have to utilize other methods when you're looking at this during certain types of evaluations. You can use the quasi-experimental design, and remember we talked about this in another chapter, where when randomization is not possible, so you cannot have an experimental and you cannot randomly assign them to the experimental and the control group for any number of reasons. You would also use quasi-experimental designs in these examples if you have an ex post evaluation, meaning that it's conducted after the experimental program has gone into effect. So you would have to choose that program that's already there. You might be looking at full coverage programs so that everyone is required to participate. So, for instance, the sentencing guidelines here is an example. If it's a statewide requirement, then you would everybody there it's not randomly chosen. They are specifically there. You might look at larger treatment units, like for instance the neighborhood crime prevention program. In this case, you're looking at a large area, so it's just not possible to randomly assign neighborhoods to receive the intervention while you withhold it from others. That's unethical, so you cannot do that. Also, you might have an interrupted time series design that requires the attention to different issues because researchers can't control how reliable the experimental treatment is that's actually implemented. So there's all different occurrences when you would have to use the quasi-experimental design. And again, it's when randomization is not possible. Okay. And now we're going to talk about problem analysis. And problem analysis is different than program evaluation, but they can be used together to enhance the program. The problem analysis is used to really design alternative methods of action, and then you choose among those that would best benefit that program. So researchers or evaluators, when they're doing a program and they notice any discrepancies or anything, you could offer a problem analysis to the stakeholders, and it helps search for the mechanisms, those which would be your independent variables, acting in context to explain the outcomes, which are your dependent variables. So the evaluator, a program evaluator, is not necessarily there to find fault, but is to help enhance the program through problem analysis. For instance, one of the major evaluation methods is problem-oriented policing. So through evaluation of neighborhood crimes and through the types of policing, one of the problem analysis was to begin problem-oriented policing, and it was in order to solve a specific problem. And through this was the idea of how to do it guides, which is just a general guide to crime analysis to support problem-oriented policing. It's just a way to help the program get off the ground. And you also have problem and response guides, and it describes how to analyze certain types of problems and what are known to be ineffective or effective or ineffective responses to that problem. And it just helps build, as you're building a program or you're showing alternatives to a problem for a program, that you have these types of guides to help the program stakeholders. Another example of using problem analysis is the study done in Chula Vista regarding auto theft by Nancy Plouffe and Raina Sampson in 2004. They began their analysis of vehicle theft by comparing Chula Vista to other Southern California cities. So they found that the theft rates tended to be higher for cities closer to the border. They found that 10 parking lots accounted for 25% of thefts and 20% of break-ins in the city. They found that 6 of the 10 lots were among the top 10 calls, and that auto theft hotspots tended to be the hotspots for other kinds of incidents. These are all ways to use problem analysis in order to better a program or better a problem that has been identified. Other ways to use policy analysis are through space and time-based analysis, where you have increased prevalence due to technological advances. You might have crime maps that represent a number of different things. May have one or more crime types, space or area, a certain geographical area, a certain time period, and some dimension of land use. Usually streets, you might be looking at and crime mapping does normally cover a specific area composed of certain streets. Like, for instance, you might be looking at downtown Detroit, and your map will only include out to a certain, you'll have your boundaries within that area. Problem-solving tools and processes, the strategic approaches to community safety in an initiative, which is just one example of a type of problem-solving tool and process. This here is an example of a crime map. Oops, let me move this up a little bit so we can see. Oops. See what it says. Drug arrest hotspots. By using a map such as this, it's very easy to explain where are the highest drug spots within in this area during these years. So this right here tells us a lot more than if somebody had written out a whole report and had described all this. We know that in 1998 the hot spots are the red parts, right, which are not a lot. And then you can, as you move down here, oops, let me see what that is. My thing's not working well here. Let's see. Trying to see what the blue is. It's not telling me on this map. So it's just not reading it right. But in 1997 is the blue areas. And right here, when they have the circles, it's showing you that that's the area that's most active. And so in 1996, it's the green areas. So it's showing you how it's moving around from one area to another. So this type of map just shows us a lot more than just talking about it. Let's fix this again so y'all can see it all. There's also a good example in your textbooks of the crime mapping. Really, in summary, when we get to the point about the political context of applied research, as we've seen in this chapter, evaluation research and policy analysis are examples of applying research methods instead of just researching externally. So in this process, there are different stakeholders that have their different interests, and they can produce conflicting perspectives on evaluations. So that's why an evaluator, when they go in to evaluate any program, they have to be aware of the stakeholder's interest, right? Because the stakeholder wants that evaluator to obviously come up with a positive evaluation and not have any identified areas that need to be corrected. Therefore, the researcher must identify the stakeholders and their perspectives, and you should do this really as you go in before evaluating. You need to educate the stakeholders on why the evaluation should be conducted. Many times, the evaluator is coming in from an outside source to evaluate that program. It could be, for instance, if it's a state-funded program, then state evaluators would come in to make sure that where their money goes is being conducted as they say it is, and as the state, they told the state that it would be. They want to make sure their outcomes that they're reporting or producing are accurate. The researcher also needs to explain that applied research is used to determine what works and what does not work. So it's not to criticize, but it's to improve the program. The political concerns and ideology can color an evaluation. So the researcher needs to be careful. They need to enter any evaluation unbiased, openly, and with the idea that they are looking as an outsider to improve and identify the positive as well as the negative. So this chapter and this information is information that you might not see. You also might use this within your own employment. If you're ever asked to evaluate a program within your company, you could refer to program analysis and use these areas. It's really the same, all that we have learned so far in designs, sampling, experimental, field research, qualitative. You would take all of those qualities and use it to evaluate and apply those skills to evaluating a program.